Lucas stared at the dim glow of Chloe's phone, her message notifications lighting up the screen. A single buzz had led him here, to the quiet of their bedroom while Chloe prepared for a late-night work meeting in the adjoining bathroom. The words on the screen froze him in place. Can't wait to see you tonight. Same spot. Love. Evan. His mind raced, the weight of those words pressing down on him like a stone. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Evan was a face from their gatherings, someone he'd met through Chloe's work. A younger, confident man whose laughter had lingered a little too long in Chloe's company. Lucas's chest tightened as pieces of an invisible puzzle clicked together. Over the past months, Lucas had dismissed the signs. Chloe's sudden interest in late nights, her guarded smiles when asked about her day, the occasional unfamiliar cologne that didn't belong to him. He'd chalked it up to stress, to the distance that sometimes grew in long marriages. But now, staring at her phone, Lucas knew this was more than a phase. Lucas had a feeling that maybe the breakup's with everything in his life. He looked away from Lucas's phone, heading to the front door. The sound of running water stopped abruptly, and Chloe's voice floated out, bright and casual. "Lucas, have you seen my silver earrings? The dangly ones?" For a moment, Lucas couldn't respond. He carefully placed the phone back where he'd found it, its screen now dark. "They're on the dresser," he called back, forcing calm into his voice. As Chloe stepped into the room, her reflection caught in the mirror. She was radiant in a sleek dress that accentuated her elegance, her blonde hair flowing in soft waves, her smile polished and ready. To Lucas, though, she looked like a stranger, a puzzle he no longer understood. "Thanks, hon," she said, slipping on the earrings and inspecting herself. "I might be late tonight. Don't wait up." He nodded, swallowing the anger rising in his throat. "Sure. Be safe." As the door clicked shut behind her, Lucas sank onto the edge of their bed. His mind churned, the betrayal seeping into every thought. He wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to lash out at the injustice of it all. But he knew impulsive action wasn't his way. His patience had been his greatest strength, and tonight it would serve him again. Lucas pulled out his phone and opened a secure browser. Years in finance had taught him the value of careful planning and documentation, a lesson he now applied to his personal life. A quick search yielded a service specializing in private investigations. He booked a consultation for the next day. If Chloe was lying, he needed undeniable proof, not just for himself, but for the inevitable fallout. Later that night, Lucas stood at their bedroom window, staring out into the quiet suburban street. His thoughts shifted between their 10 years together, shared laughter, quiet mornings, the plans they'd made, and the cold, calculated betrayal unfolding before him. As the minutes turned into hours, Chloe's absence felt like a physical ache. By the time she returned, the moon hung high in the sky. Lucas watched from the shadows as Chloe entered quietly, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She didn't notice him as she slipped off her shoes, her face a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. "Oh, oh, oh." "Good meeting?" Lucas asked, his voice low. Chloe started, her hand flying to her chest. "Lucas, you scared me. What are you doing up?" He stepped into the light, his expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep." Chloe smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It went fine, just a lot to go over. You know how it is." Lucas nodded, holding her gaze. "I'm sure." As Chloe disappeared into the bathroom to wash up, Lucas made a silent vow. Whatever came next, he would handle it his way, with precision, patience, and a resolve Chloe and Evan wouldn't see coming. The pieces were falling into place, and the game had just begun. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, slicing the room into streaks of light and shadow. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold as he scrolled through the private investigator's website on his tablet. A man of routine, Lucas usually started his day with the quiet comfort of Chloe's company, sharing news and casual conversation. Today, the silence felt heavier, punctuated only by the occasional bird call outside. Chloe's absence was conspicuous. She had left early for what she claimed was an important client meeting. By noon, Lucas found himself in a nondescript office on the edge of town. The PI's office was understated, neutral walls, a modest desk, and shelves lined with case files. Across from him sat a man named Greg Mitchell, whose no-nonsense demeanor and calm professionalism gave Lucas a sliver of reassurance. "Where is that?" "By New Mitchell," by Lucas shouted. Greg's eyes slowly wandered along the walls, looking for his basement door. He saw a door to the back of it and looked in, startled. "So, Greg began, setting a notepad on the desk. "Tell me what you suspect, you know?" Lucas hesitated for only a moment before speaking. "My wife, Chloe. She's been different, distant. There are signs, late nights, secretive behavior. And last night, I saw a message on her phone. It's clear there's someone else, a man named Evan." Greg nodded, jotting down notes. "Do you want definitive proof, or are you looking for more?" Lucas's gray eyes locked onto Greg's. "I need everything. Photos, messages, times, locations. I want to know how far this has gone, and I want it documented." "Oh, understood." Greg slid a contract across the desk. "I'll need her schedule, any details you can provide, workplace, habits, phone numbers. The more you give me, the faster I can work." Lucas signed the paperwork, his mind already racing ahead. When he handed over Chloe's details, he felt a pang of regret, a small voice in the back of his mind asking if he was going too far. But then he remembered her laughter with Evan, the message that had shattered the fragile trust between them. By the time Lucas returned home, the wheels were in motion. He spent the afternoon preparing for what he knew would be a long and difficult road. Lucas pulled out a folder he kept locked in his office, a detailed record of their joint finances, property, and shared investments. Chloe had once joked about his need for organization, calling it overkill. But now it felt like armor. Yeah. 2 days later, Greg called with an update. "She met him again last night," Greg said. "Same spot, a park on the edge of town. They were there for about 2 hours. I've got pictures and audio." Lucas's heart tightened. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear the details, but he knew he needed to. "Send me everything," he replied. "Dame got a job for me to do. Dame told me he's on it. So am I. After all, it'll only be for a few months." Lucas. When the email arrived, Lucas stared at the file for a long time before opening it. The photos were sharp and damning. Chloe and Evan sitting close on a bench, their heads tilted toward each other, their expressions open and unguarded. There was a familiarity in their posture, a sense of ease that stung more than any explicit betrayal. Evan would be pleased to know who he had, I suppose. He still admired Evan, and then came the audio. Lucas pressed play, his hand trembling slightly as Chloe's voice filled the room. "I feel so free when I'm with you," she said, her tones soft and wistful. "You deserve to be happy," Evan replied, his confidence palpable. "He doesn't appreciate you the way I do." Lucas stopped the recording, unable to listen further. The words cut deep, each one chipping away at the image of the life he thought they had built together. He clenched his fists, fighting the anger rising in his chest. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a rewriting of their story, a denial of everything they had shared. That evening, Lucas sat in the dim glow of his office, poring over the evidence Greg had sent. Each photo, each recording, was a nail in the coffin of their marriage. But it was also fuel for his resolve. He called Sandra, his oldest and most trusted friend. A lawyer by profession, she had always been a steady presence in his life, offering calm advice when emotions threatened to take over. "Sandra," Lucas began, his voice heavy. "I need your help. It's about Chloe." Sandra listened quietly as Lucas explained everything. When he finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Lucas, she said finally, this is going to be messy. You need to protect yourself, legally and emotionally. Are you ready for that? Yes, Lucas, I said, because I didn't know what else to do. I don't have a choice, he replied. I can't let her walk away from this unscathed. She needs to face the consequences. Sandra promised to start drafting the necessary documents, and Lucas felt a small measure of relief. With Sandra's expertise and Greg's evidence, he was building a case that would leave no room for doubt. The next few days passed in a haze of strategy and surveillance. Greg continued to provide updates, each one adding another layer to the story. Lucas learned that Evan wasn't just a fling. He was a coworker who had been in Chloe's orbit for over a year. Their meetings were frequent, their interactions intimate, and they're starting to open up more for me to get to engage her in conversation. But Lucas also learned something else. Evan had a fiancée. Her name was Rachel, and she was blissfully unaware of the double life Evan was leading. He began to explain the reason for his absence, somehow not wanting to tell her everything. This discovery was a turning point for Lucas. He realized he wasn't just fighting for his own dignity, he was uncovering a web of deceit that stretched beyond his marriage. He debated whether to reach out to Rachel to warn her about the man she was planning to marry. But he knew he needed to tread carefully. His focus remained on Chloe. For now. One night, as Lucas reviewed the latest evidence, Chloe entered the room. She hesitated at the doorway, her expression wary, her face distorted, her eyes wide, her mouth open. Lucas waved her away and came to her aid. Lucas wrapped his arm around Lucas, holding him tight, her mouth open, her arms around him. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her tone light but probing. "Oh." Lucas looked up, his gray eyes unreadable. "Just busy with work." Chloe nodded, but the tension in the room was palpable. For the first time, Lucas saw cracks in her facade, a flicker of guilt, a hint of unease. "Okay," Lucas said, and wandered across the tiny room to the dresser to get his clothes on faster. As she left, Lucas felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She didn't know what was coming, didn't realize the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his resolve hardening. Chloe and Evan had built their lives on a foundation of arrogance, believing they could outsmart him. They had underestimated him, his patience, his intelligence, his ability to see through their charade. Lucas, you know what? The stage was set, the pieces in place. Lucas would not act impulsively. He would wait until the perfect moment to strike, and when he did, the fallout would be inescapable. Plan a defeat, and Iceman was game on. Question mark. Proceed gently. Lucas woke early the next morning, his mind already spinning with the day's tasks. He had always believed in the power of preparation, and this situation was no exception. The quiet resolve he had built over the last few days now solidified into a plan. A clear, deliberate path to expose Chloe and Evan without leaving room for doubt or escape. The first step was organization. Lucas spent hours in his office, sorting through the evidence Greg had gathered. The photographs, audio files, and surveillance footage were damning, but Lucas knew he needed to present them in a way that was irrefutable. He created a timeline, beginning with the first documented meeting between Chloe and Evan and stretching to their most recent rendezvous. Each entry included time-stamped photos, audio snippets, and contextual notes. It was meticulous work, the kind Lucas thrived on. But with each new addition to the timeline, Lucas felt the sting of betrayal anew. Chloe's face in the photos, her laughter, her affectionate glances, felt like a slap to his sense of reality. By mid-afternoon, Lucas had compiled a comprehensive dossier. It was a grim testament to the lengths Chloe had gone to deceive him, but it also represented his weapon in the battle ahead. He saved the file to a secure drive, knowing it would be critical for the next steps. I've been, refining my key, he said. The next step was more delicate. Rachel, Evan's fiancée. Lucas had spent days debating whether to involve her, weighing the morality of upending her life against the necessity of exposing the truth. In the end, he decided she had a right to know. Lucas found Rachel's social media profiles with ease. Her accounts were public, filled with cheerful photos of her and Evan at various milestones. Engagement photos, vacation snapshots, posts about wedding planning. Each image was a painful reminder of the facade Evan had maintained, just as Chloe had. Her tinkering with her. I have seen her damage stuff in my room scholarships. Lucas sent Rachel a message through a secure account, choosing his words carefully. Rachel, I don't know you personally, but I believe you need to know something about Evan. My wife, Chloe, has been having an affair with him. I have evidence to back this up. Photos, recordings, and timelines. I'm sharing this because you deserve to know the truth before making any life-changing decisions. If you'd like to discuss this further, please let me know. No, I think you'll be okay with me if I tell you that, but I think you should know. Also, I'll tell you about this in a minute. He hit send and sat back, his heart pounding. It was out of his hands now. All he could do was wait. As the day wore on, Lucas turned his attention to the legal side of things. Sandra had been working tirelessly to draft the divorce papers and strategize the best way to present the case. They met that evening in her office, the atmosphere heavy with tension. Here's what we've got, Sandra began, sliding a folder across the desk. This is everything we need to move forward. The evidence is airtight, and the financial records you provided show that Chloe hasn't been entirely honest about her spending habits either. Lucas opened the folder, scanning the documents. It was all there. Grounds for divorce, evidence of infidelity, and a financial breakdown that would minimize Chloe's share in the settlement. Sandra leaned forward, her expression firm. Once you serve these papers, it's going to escalate. Chloe will likely deny everything at first, but when confronted with the evidence, she might try to negotiate. You need to stay firm. Don't let her manipulate you. Lucas nodded, the weight of the situation settling over him. I won't. This has to be done right. Good, Sandra said. One more thing. You need to consider how this will affect your social circle. People will take sides, and it might get messy. Lucas had thought about this. Their friends, their family, even their neighbors. Chloe's betrayal wouldn't just hurt their marriage. It would ripple outward, forcing everyone to confront their loyalties. I'm prepared for that, Lucas said, his voice steady. That evening, Lucas received a reply from Rachel. Her message was short and cautious. I don't know who you are, but if you're telling the truth, I need to see the evidence. Please send it to me. Lucas hesitated for a moment before replying. He sent Rachel a link to the secure drive containing the dossier, along with a brief note claiming the same rights as hers, and she replied, "Soon for people." Mark read through it all quickly, hesitated for a moment. Favorite things to do. Lucky, take your time reviewing this. If you want to talk afterward, I'm here. Hours later, his phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. Lucas answered, his heart racing. Lucas? A voice asked, trembling slightly. Yes, this is Lucas. This is Rachel. Her voice broke. I don't know what to say. I've been with Evan for years and I never suspected. This is horrible. Lucas listened as Rachel poured out her disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. She thanked him for telling her the truth despite the pain it caused and vowed to confront Evan. You've given me a chance to walk away before it's too late, Rachel said finally. Thank you. Lucas hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. He had done the right thing, but the cost of the truth was steep. The final stage of Lucas's plan was to confront Chloe directly. He had chosen a calculated approach, one that would expose her lies in a way she couldn't deny. But Lucas had to know one more step too far, and he'd be up for the count. And if he got farther, a few days later, Lucas invited their closest friends to dinner, a seemingly casual gathering at their home. Chloe was surprised, but agreed, eager to maintain appearances. You're attractive, Chloe said, avoiding his eyes. laughing at the effort she made of remembering how old she was. As their friends laughed and chatted over drinks, Lucas watched Chloe closely. She was radiant, her charm on full display, but Lucas could see the cracks, the occasional nervous glance, the forced laughter. When the conversation turned to vacations, Lucas seized the moment. "Chloe, why don't you tell everyone about your recent trip?" Chloe froze, her glass hovering midair. "Oh, it wasn't much," she said quickly. "Just a work thing." Lucas smiled, his tone casual. "Really? Because I have some photos that suggest otherwise." The room fell silent as Lucas pulled out his tablet and displayed the evidence. The images of Chloe and Evan at the park, the recordings of their conversations, it was all there. Undeniable. Chloe's face turned white as their friends stared, shocked and disbelieving. Lucas, this is this is ridiculous," she stammered. "You've been spying on me." No, Chloe," Lucas said, his voice calm but firm. "I've been uncovering the truth. You betrayed me, and now everyone knows it." The fallout was immediate. Chloe's friends turned away, their expressions a mixture of pity and judgment. Chloe fled the room, leaving Lucas alone with the weight of his choices. As the doors slammed shut, Lucas felt a strange sense of closure. The life he had built with Chloe was over, but the truth had set him free. Chloe entered and followed him outside. Lucas started for the back door, but the truth had set him free. The aftermath of Lucas's revelation was chaotic, a whirlwind of emotions and broken relationships that rippled through every corner of his life. Chloe's dramatic exit from the dinner party had left a stunned silence in her wake, broken only by the murmurs of their friends trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Lucas sat in the living room long after the last guest had left, the weight of his actions settling on his chest. He had imagined this moment so many times, Chloe exposed, the truth undeniable, but now that it had come to pass, it felt emptier than he had expected. His marriage was over, but the end hadn't brought the catharsis he had hoped for. Instead, it brought only a quiet, smoldering ache. The next morning, Chloe was gone. She hadn't returned after leaving the party, and Lucas didn't expect her to. He found himself staring at the empty space in their closet where her clothes had been, the reality of her absence striking him with an unexpected pang of sorrow. He had fought so hard for this moment, but now that it was here, the finality of it was staggering. None. By noon, Lucas received a message from her. "Lucas, I'll come by tomorrow to pick up the rest of my things. Please don't be there. We need space. I'm sorry for everything." He stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. In the end, he typed 2 words. "Understood." Lucas spent the day preparing for the next steps. He had anticipated Chloe's departure and had already started the process of separating their lives. Financial accounts were frozen or transferred, legal documents reviewed. Sandra's advice rang in his ears. Be methodical. Don't leave anything to chance. He called Sandra to update her on the situation. "She's gone," he said simply. "That's good," Sandra replied. "It'll make the divorce proceedings smoother. I've already filed the papers. She'll be served tomorrow." "Are you ready for this?" "There's likely to be defenses," Rhetoric continued, "but there is a little injury, and the boys need care." Lucas hesitated. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but it's what has to be done." "So exactly," Sandra said. "Remember, this isn't just about ending the marriage. It's about protecting yourself. She made her choices, and now she has to face the consequences." So, at one point, the wallet was returned to Sandra, and Lucas hung up, feeling a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. He had always been the type to handle things head on, but this situation was testing the limits of his endurance. "Why do you come so late?" Electra asked. Is she not looking in the direction he was looking? The next day, Lucas left the house early, giving Chloe the space she had requested. He didn't want to see her pack up the remnants of their life together. The thought was too painful. Instead, he drove to a nearby park and spent the morning walking along the trails, his mind churning with conflicting emotions. He thought about the early days of their relationship when everything had seemed so effortless. Chloe's laughter, her warmth, the way she had made him feel like the center of her world. Those memories felt like ghosts now, haunting him with their contrast to the present. By the time Lucas returned home, Chloe was gone. The house felt different, as though her departure had sucked the air from the rooms. He wandered through the spaces they had once shared, noting the subtle changes, the missing photos from the mantel, the empty drawer in the kitchen where she kept her favorite teas. On the dining table, he found a note in her familiar handwriting. They all drank from their water bottles and flexed their facial muscles. Otis, I know you won't forgive me, and I don't expect you to. I've made terrible mistakes and I'll have to live with them. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I hope one day you find peace. Lucas read the note twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. He didn't know if he would ever look at it again, but for now, it felt right to keep it. Over the next week, the news of their split spread quickly through their social circle. Friends called and messaged, some offering support, others fishing for details. Lucas kept his responses brief, unwilling to air his private pain more than necessary. I have a tumor, he said, disgusted at the first sign of pain. So, one evening, Sandra came over with a bottle of wine and a listening ear. You've been quiet, she said, as they sat in the living room. How are you holding up? I said, finally speaking, my words logged in my throat. Lucas shrugged. I'm surviving. Some days are better than others. That's to be expected, Sandra said gently. This kind of betrayal, it's not something you just get over. It'll take time. They talked late into the night, and for the first time in weeks, Lucas felt a glimmer of hope. Sandra's steady presence reminded him that he wasn't alone, that there were people who cared about him and wanted to see him rebuild. The fallout wasn't limited to Lucas and Chloe. Evan's fiancée Rachel had confronted him after reviewing the evidence Lucas had provided. The engagement was off, and Rachel had sent Lucas a brief message to thank him again for telling her the truth. You saved me from a lifetime of lies, she had written. I'll never forget that. Evan, on the other hand, was less gracious. Lucas received a curt email from him a few days later. Congratulations, Lucas. You've destroyed everything. I hope it was worth it. Lucas didn't reply. He had nothing to say to a man who had played such a central role in shattering his life. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas began the slow process of rebuilding. He threw himself into his work, finding solace in the structure and predictability of his career. He reconnected with old friends, people he hadn't seen in years because his life with Chloe had consumed so much of his time. He also started therapy, something Sandra had strongly encouraged. At first, Lucas had been reluctant. He wasn't the type to spill his emotions to a stranger, but he quickly realized how much he needed the outlet. Talking about his pain, his anger, and his fears helped him begin to untangle the knot of emotions that had been choking him. One evening, Lucas sat on his porch, a cup of coffee in hand as the sun set over the neighborhood. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of peace. He thought about Chloe, not with anger or sadness, but with acceptance. Their marriage had been a chapter in his life, one filled with both joy and pain. It was over now, but he was still here, still standing. Lucas took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling the weight on his chest lift just a little. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, he felt ready to walk it. The days that followed Chloe's departure were filled with a strange stillness. Lucas awoke to an empty house, the absence of her presence palpable in every corner. The morning routine was different now, quieter, lonelier, but it carried a freedom he hadn't fully anticipated. He no longer had to pretend, no longer had to navigate the unspoken tension that had shadowed their final months together. Still, freedom came with a cost. As Lucas adjusted to his new reality, He found himself grappling with the weight of what had been lost. 10 years of marriage weren't something he could simply forget, no matter how deeply Chloe had betrayed him. One evening, as he sifted through old photos stored on his laptop, Lucas stumbled upon a folder labeled Honeymoon. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the mouse. Curiosity won out, and he clicked the folder open. Images of their trip to Santorini filled the screen. Chloe laughing in the sun, the two of them standing arm in arm against a backdrop of whitewashed buildings and a cerulean sea. The joy in their faces was undeniable, and for a moment, Lucas felt a pang of grief, so sharp it took his breath away. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Those moments had been real, hadn't they? The love they had shared, the promises they had made. It wasn't all a lie. Chloe's betrayal had stolen so much from him, but it couldn't erase the memories of the life they had built together. Start to finish, he said, straightening up. Okay. Start to finish? For the first time, Lucas allowed himself to grieve, not just for the marriage that had ended, but for the man he had been when it began. Lucas's therapy sessions became a lifeline in the weeks that followed. His therapist, Dr. Hayward, was patient and insightful, helping him untangle the complex emotions that swirled within him. The betrayal shakes the foundation of who we are, Dr. Hayward said during one session. It forces us to question our judgment, our trust, even our sense of self. But it's also an opportunity to rebuild, to create something stronger. It's true. The first rage was self-reflection. And what I find stronger is radiation of love and the bitter seed of revenge. Lucas nodded, though the idea of rebuilding still felt daunting. How do you let go of the anger, he asked. You don't, Dr. Hayward replied, not entirely. Anger has its place. It's a natural response to being wronged, but over time you can transform it into something constructive. Use it to set boundaries, to protect yourself, to fuel your growth. It wasn't an easy process, but Lucas began to see the wisdom in those words. He started journaling, pouring his thoughts onto the page as a way to process his emotions. Some entries were raw and angry, others reflective and hopeful. Gradually, the act of writing became a form of release, a way to unburden himself from the weight he had been carrying. Sandra remained a steadfast presence in Lucas's life. She checked in regularly, offering advice and support without judgment. One evening, she invited Lucas to dinner at her home, a warm and lively gathering with her husband and children. As Lucas watched the easy laughter and camaraderie around the table, he felt a pang of longing. It wasn't the first time he had thought about what his future might hold, but now the thought felt less intimidating. You'll get there, Sandra said quietly, as if reading his mind. It takes time, but you will. And when you're ready, the right person will come along. It's okay, Sandra, I nodded. Lucas managed a small smile. I don't even know where to start. Start with yourself, Sandra said simply. Figure out what makes you happy, what brings you peace. The rest will follow. Mark said, trying to process all this information, in hopes that it will be useful one day. But what was expected of him was if he followed his passion, and he got to work again. He got paid. Inspired by Sandra's words, Lucas began exploring old hobbies he had neglected during his marriage. He took his camera out of storage and started going on long hikes, capturing the beauty of the world around him. Photography had always been a passion of his, but it had fallen by the wayside as life grew busier. One afternoon, while photographing a forest trail bathed in golden sunlight, Lucas felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't just the act of creating something beautiful. It was the realization that he was rediscovering parts of himself that had been buried for too long. He also started volunteering at a local community center, helping organize events and mentor young adults. The work was fulfilling, giving him a sense of purpose and connection that had been missing from his life. Through these activities, Lucas began to rebuild not just his routines, but his identity. He was no longer defined by his role as Chloe's husband or by the betrayal that had shattered their marriage. He was forging a new path, one step at a time. One day, Lucas received a call from Rachel. It had been weeks since they last spoke, and he was surprised to hear her voice. "Hi, Lucas," she said. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." "I'm hanging in there," Lucas replied. "How about you?" "It's been a lot," Rachel admitted. "But I'm moving forward. I've started seeing a therapist, and I've been spending more time with my family. It's helping." "Ball, it's kind of good that you're single, right? There's more time for you. Um, you're being pretty skinny, and you're making me happy." They talked for nearly an hour, sharing updates and reflecting on how their lives had changed. By the time they hung up, Lucas felt a sense of camaraderie with Rachel, a shared understanding born from their parallel experiences. He just wanted them to remember what happened, whatever it was, and be as safe as possible and not feel weird anymore. Months later, Lucas stood in his backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The house felt different now, less like a reminder of what he had lost and more like a space where he could grow. Uh, what? As the evening deepened, he thought about the journey he had taken. It hadn't been easy, and there were still moments when the pain resurfaced, sharp and sudden. But those moments were becoming less frequent, overshadowed by the progress he had made. Lucas knew he wasn't the same person he had been before Chloe's betrayal. He was stronger now, more self-aware, more determined to live authentically. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he felt ready to embrace it. He smiled to himself, a quiet, contented smile. The past was behind him, and the future was his to create. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Lucas turned and walked back inside, closing the door on the chapter of his life that had defined him for too long.